in Chelek, in the 10th chapter of Sanhedrin, he rejects all those sort of quasi-physical options that people tend to believe about reward and punishment. Garden of Eden, the resurrection of the dead, time of the Messiah, the Messianic hero, but that resurrection of the dead. And he says none of those are right. It's really the world to come. It's the soul in the world to come. And then here in the Mishnah Torah, in the laws of repentance, he says the world to come you don't have any body. And he quotes from the Talmud saying, rather, the souls of the righteous are like ministering angels. They have no physical form. There's no eating and drinking. There's none of that. But rather, it's exactly what the rabbis say in the Talmud, which is that they just, bask in the light of the divine presence, with sort of this metaphorical idea of crowns on their heads. Now, the Raavad, the very central commentary on the Rambam, he writes as follows on this. Right, so now you could say, okay, the Rambam also believes that there's the resurrection of the dead. Goes to arrive. It's really like, again, it's like a gloss on Maimonides. Says the world to come harbors neither body nor aught of a concrete form. In other words, the world to come is only spiritual. So the Raavad says this man's words, referring to the Rambam, are in my eyes denied to such who assert that there is no resurrection to the body, but the souls alone. This is easier to understand in Hebrew. Ani Omer, Divrei Haish Hazeh, the words of this man, in my eyes, Krovim, the Misha Omer, they're close to one who would say, the one who would say there is no resurrection of the dead for bodies, there's only resurrection of the dead for souls. Now, what does that mean? Right now, he says, I know the Rambam's not a heretic, but it sure sounds like the Rambam doesn't believe in the physical resurrection of the dead. It sounds like he believes, if he believes in the resurrection of the dead, it's only in the soul resurrection. So it's an interesting idea that the Rambam, but wherever the Rambam talks about the resurrection of the dead, and we'll see it even in the epistle, he doesn't really seem to commit to fleshing it out. So it is possible that the Rambam, whenever he says the resurrection of the dead, he doesn't really mean the physical resurrection of the dead. Now, we'll have to see what he does with that, because he does have to get into that in this epistle. But it could be that in the two places where he mentions it, other than in this epistle, meaning in where he mentions it once in the laws of repentance that you have to believe it, and once in his commentary on the Mishnah that you have to believe it, but doesn't flesh it out. It could be that the Rambam sees the word resurrection of the dead as not a physical thing. Maybe it's a spiritual thing. Maybe it is the same. Maybe it's synonymous with the world to come. So he doesn't. The Raavad doesn't say that the Rambam has crossed the line here and denied the resurrection of the dead. He says, but it sure sounds like, and he calls him Haish Hazeh, this man. He says it sure sounds like. He says, in my eyes, it sounds like he's very close to saying that there is no physical resurrection of the dead. V'chaye Rashi lo hayadat chazal. And he says, this is not, by the life of my head, right? It's saying this is not the opinion of our sages. Right? The Rambam is going against, he says, the opinion of our sages, where the sages say in Ketubot that in the future, the righteous will stand with their clothes so I'll have to look up that Gemara. And they left instructions to their children saying, bury us not in white or black garments, for when I'm resurrected, and the righteous will never again return into the dust, but remain standing in their concrete form. But yet again, they say they'll rise. So he says, all of which is conclusive proofs that the dead will rise in their body and remain alive. Nonetheless, it's possible the Creator will set them in strong and healthy forms in the form of angels. Right? So the Raavad says, we seem to have this. Now, the Rambam keeps quoting the same phrase from the Gemara over and over again, which is that in the world to come, the righteous will sit with crowns on their heads and bask. There will be no eating and drinking. And nothing physical, and the righteous will bask in the night. So a lot of things you could prove from the Talmud. The Talmud is not a systematic book of theology at all, right? I mean, you could prove anything from the Talmud. So it's always this way. It's this way with every rabbi. I mean, what you choose to quote and what you choose to focus on is not something small, it's everything, right? I remember in St. Louis, there was a rabbi who every parsha he had exactly the same message, which was love your neighbor as yourself. There was another rabbi in town who on every Torah portion had exactly the same message, which was our theology is correct and everybody else's, whether Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, is wrong. We're the only right people. And he basically rejected everybody else. And both of those rabbis could find that in every parsha, right? That's how the Torah is. So it's true, the Rambam keeps quoting one thing. The Rabbit here is saying there's lots of other things that seem to indicate in the Talmud that we do believe in the physical resurrection. So now this goes back a long way. This big question of what did the Rambam believe, and it's even the most classic commentary on the Rambam, who's already bringing up, like, when you read the Rambam, you don't really see the physical resurrection of the dead. Okay, so now in light of that, I want to go back to sort of the beginning of the epistle and sort of really examine what is the Rambam saying. The idea that this whole epistle of 50 paragraphs is really just for him to say, I do believe in the resurrection of the dead, right? The Rambam, it's never that simple. The question is he saying more than one thing here? He will say that, but I think we'll see that at the same time that he says it, he seems to hedge. And I'll show you some of the places where I think that's true. This is way at the beginning. This is Ibn Tibbon's introduction. And let's go here. The introduction to the commentary on the Mishnah, we mentioned there are certain principles we need to accept. There's certain principles that we need to accept. In chapter Chelek, we also explained, that was his commentary on the Mishnah, fundamental tenets regarding the beginning of the world, the ultimate recompense, that people are going to be rewarded. And then he says, among the fundamental principles to which we call attention is the world to come. Right? The world to come for the Rambam is not the resurrection of the dead. I'll stop my video, something's wrong with it. But it is it is not the resurrection of the dead. It is the world to come, which is just a soul thing. And for the Rambam, maybe intellect. We cited proofs from the words of the Bible and from the words of the rabbis. We explained that which should be explained to intelligent people. Right? Intelligent people. Right? He already said in Chelek, in his commentary on the Mishnah, that most people believe what he called wrong beliefs. And all of those were, sort of physical resurrection, physical reward, all of that. Rambam believes reward is spiritual. We commented and made known the reason why we place such emphasis to elucidate the subject of the world without elucidating the resurrection of the dead. Now the Rambam says, why didn't I talk about the resurrection of the dead in all my other books? Because I didn't think it was important to focus on, because it's not the real reward. In other words, maybe it happens. Another problem with the Rambam's going to have with the resurrection of the dead is miracles. In other words, I mentioned this before, that miracles for the Rambam, he does believe in miracles, but they have to fit into the laws of nature in some way. They have to be sort of preordained. He does believe in miracles, but sort of preordained as part of nature, so that they're not actually a violation of nature. They're just that they happen once in a while. So for him to have that, the process of the world ends at something miraculous where people live without eating and drinking, and that's how it is for time immemorial, or time on, that doesn't make any sense, because then that's not a miracle. That's the way the world is. And the Rambam can't have the laws of nature change in this world. So he says, we explained without elucidating the resurrection of the dead, and we said that we've only observed people engaged in discussions of the resurrection of the dead on silly matters, assuming, right, will they arise naked or in their clothes? In other words, that people assume it's physical. And the Rambam seems to think that's silly. However, the world to come is totally forgotten. Furthermore, we explain here that why, because people have a hard time getting beyond materialism. We explain here that the resurrection of the dead is one of the cornerstones of Torah's servant Moses, but is not the ultimate goal. So then here the Rambam says both, right? He says, of course, we do believe in it. I can't deny that. And I did say in other places that you have to believe it, but it's not the ultimate goal. Meaning what? It's not the reward and punishment. The ultimate goal is the world to come. That is just the soul in the world to come, the intellect. that there is no reward or punishment described in the Torah except in relation. We're coming to clarify the great doubt which is pondered by the masses, that the masses think there's no reward and punishment described in the Torah except in the present world. Now, you might think that because you read the 5 books of Moses, that is all you see. I'm going to bring the rain in its time. You'll chase away your enemies. And that there's no reward or punishment clearly mentioned in relation to the world to come, right? That you could certainly assume that from the Torah. And he says the masses do assume. Masses assume that their reward is going to be. We elucidated from the words of the Torah, according to the rabbis, that the Torah's intent is to in regard to reward, is that the ultimate goal is the life of the world to come, right? He's referring to that one line he keeps quoting, which is, there's no eating and drinking in the world to come. The righteous sit with the crowns in their heads and bask in the light of the Shekhinah, the divine presence. And in regard to punishment, it is the ultimate end, which is extinction from the world to come. All reward and punishment, he says, is in the world to come. But so now he set up a contradiction, right? The question is, okay, he says you have to believe in the resurrection of the dead, but it's not the reward and punishment for the human being. So you almost kind of wonder, what's its purpose? You know, and it's not, it can't be something forever. So what? It's almost like the Rambam has a hard time understanding, as if you don't see the reward as something physical, you see it only as something spiritual, and it's in the world to come. What role does the resurrection of the dead play? Doesn't really play a theological role. He says in chapter Chelek, but he's sort of stuck because the world does believe that and believes you're a heretic without that, and there certainly are Gemaras that refer to it. But in the chapter Chelek, we explained, as anyone who delves therein will observe, that after we spoke at length about the world to come, we asserted the resurrection of the dead is a cornerstone of the Torah, and there's no portion for him who denies that it is not part of the Torah's servant Moses. But it's not the ultimate goal, right? So here he says, that's how he's fleshing it out. And he says, you got to believe in it, but that's not what we mean by reward and punishment. So what is it? So too, in our compositions, we enumerated those who do not have a share in the world to come, right? In other words, that was in the laws of repentance in the Mishnah Torah. He does say all of those. He is a person who denies Moses, person who denies the Torah, person who denies the world to come. There were 24 people for whom, and for fear lest the copyist omit one of them and somebody say we did not mention them. That's why he said that there are 24. Now to count them up. He's worried somebody might leave out, one and accuse him of leaving one out. Among the 24, we put one who denies the resurrection. And we mentioned and when we mentioned the world to come, we also explained there, this is the ultimate goal. And the recompense is such that there's no higher bliss, right? Because he keeps saying, it doesn't have significance. It's not very important, but we do believe it. We've also explained that in the world to come, there's no corporeal existence. In the world to come is not physical, right? Because some people want to say that the resurrection of the dead is physical, but it's in the world to come. What do you mean by the world to come? This is true for all of us, right? We hear all these terms in Judaism, we conflate them. You ask the average Orthodox Jew, what exactly is the world to come? What exactly, is that the same as the Messiah? Is it the same as the resurrection of the dead? Is that different than the Garden of Eden? They'll be totally confused. They have no idea, actually. So the Rambam's trying to be very clear about it, about what he believes. And he believes that the sum total of reward and punishment is spiritual. It's in a soul state, and it's after one dies, and the body rots in the ground. He said that very clearly in Perek Chelek. I've also explained that in the world to come, there's no corporeal existence. There's no eating and drinking, right? He keeps quoting that same line from the Gemara. It'd be false, however, to assume that a person, so what's he saying now? Right? If in the world to come, there's no physicality, he says, it would be false to assume a person has organs for no purpose or body for no purpose. God does not create anything for naught. If a person would have a mouth and a stomach and a liver and sex organs, but not eat, drink, and procreate, his existence would be for naught. In other words, he's saying, philosophically, if you take the phrase of the rabbis that there's no eating and drinking in the world to come, then the world to come has to be spiritual. That's what he's arguing here. It can't be physical, right? He's arguing against things that are out there. I mean, for us, again, we're all Maimonideans, so it seems like ABC that real reward is spiritual and not physical. But that wasn't clear at all. And so lots of people would say, okay, yeah, it's the world to come. But the world to come is the resurrection of the dead. So he's saying it can't be, because the world to come, if it's not physical, you can't have a body there. It wouldn't make any sense philosophically. person would not argue that these essentials concerning which there are logical proofs of simple expositions are worthy of being said. And he said, oh, here, he says, a person should not argue with these essentials concerning which there are logical proofs through simple expositions. He says, don't talk about this publicly with people, because it's going to be like talking to women in the house of a mourner, by which he means there's no logic. It's just, ideas and stories. That's what he doesn't think that women are good thinkers, and I guess in the house of a mourner, that's where people are schmoozing a lot. So he says, don't try arguing this with people; they're not going to get it. And then he's going to argue. He's going to say there are those who are going to argue, well, Moses on the mountain didn't eat or drink. So you see that you can have a body without eating and drinking. Then maybe the world to come is physical, and it's the same as what we mean by the resurrection of the dead. And he's going to argue that that's not true. And he's going to argue it from a teleological point of view, meaning that to have a body that doesn't do that, he's going to use the same argument. But he's going to, now this argument from Moses and Elijah, it seems that that's actually an argument that was really out there, that people were saying, yes, the next world is physical, and the proof is Moses and Elijah lived, without eating and drinking. And this is probably comes from that treatise of Rabbi that he mentions in this book, that was arguing against him, that was trying to argue that the world to come is physical, and that's the same as the resurrection of the dead, from this Rabbi Shmuel Gaon, which is floating out there. Sort of, this may be a polemic against. Okay, so we'll read some more of these paragraphs, but I think I think I'm realizing that that's the mindset to read this with, is that the Rambam's not just reiterating, I believe in the resurrection of the dead. The Rambam is trying still to have his cake and eat it too, to say, yeah, of course, I'm a believing Jew. I believe in the resurrection of the dead, but it doesn't matter. It's not something that has any theological significance. I think that's what he's trying to say. It's only the world to come that has theological significance. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.